Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to this week's Q&A. As always, thank you so much for your questions, and also as always, if you have any new questions this week, just put them on the bottom of this Patreon post, and if a previous question doesn't get answered in this video, you can go ahead and also copy and paste that to the bottom of this Patreon post, and perhaps I'll answer it in a future video. And also, don't forget to like all of the comments that you want answered, because I am generally answering them in order of how many likes they have. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. So, Thomas Donovan asks, what would you say is the minimum average number of daily hours of active immersion that an intermediate learner needs to continue making progress towards fluency? I ask because I have less free time lately, and I'm wondering what's the lowest number of hours I should be shooting for on busy days. So, I don't know for sure because there hasn't been any studies done on this, but I would say probably 2 hours a day is the bare minimum if you're already intermediate and you're trying to truly make strides towards fluency. But if you have around 3 hours of active immersion, that's going to be a lot better. But yeah, in terms of active immersion, I would say 2 hours. And if you also get a lot of passive immersion, then I would say that's probably going to be okay. But remember, guys, in general, I would encourage you guys to just try to do as much as you can, not be thinking of what's the bare minimum so that I can scrape by. I don't think that's the most productive mindset. But there you go. So Archie Fox asks, hey Matt, I was wondering if you have any insights on how detrimental taking periodical breaks from doing MIA is to the overall progress one has already made. When I say periodical breaks, I mean anything from a week to a whole month, or sometimes more, with very little to no immersion and only keeping up with Anki reps. The reason I ask is because I have been doing MIA for just over a year now and have not been super consistent, but I'm noticing constant improvement over time. But I have the tendency to either have low motivation at certain times and get distracted by other interests, or just get too busy to keep up with the recommended hours per day and decide to take a break until I'm less busy and then pick up the pace again and go hardcore when the conditions are in my favor, which usually lasts a few months until the next mini break period seems to occur again. In your opinion, how significant is the damage done when taking breaks from MIA? And is the damage easily and quickly recovered once I go back to doing MIA hardcore again? So I would say it depends on a lot of different things. I think that what you've truly acquired, you're not going to lose very easily, even if you're at a low level. And I'm speaking out of experience here because, I've been really on and off with Chinese for multiple years now. And I seriously would only be on for a few months, and then sometimes I'd be off for years. But I would always find that when I came back to Chinese, I was pleasantly surprised that I still understood all of the things that I easily understood before. And so if you think about all the different aspects of the language and your ability, there's that bottom layer that you can understand completely effortlessly every single time. And so for me in Chinese, I remember there were words like 你在说什么 or 什么, or just things like that, where I would pick it out every time, no matter what I was watching, and it was really effortless. So that I had really locked in on an unconscious level. And that stuff I would never lose, even if I didn't listen to Chinese for years. But then there's the other stuff that's more like your cutting edge. There's the words that you've learned within the last few weeks, and you can sometimes pick out of immersion if you're lucky, but sometimes not. And that stuff you probably will lose if you take a break, if you're not already at a really high level of fluency. So basically what I'm saying is that bedrock of all the stuff that you've truly mastered, that will probably stay with you. The stuff that you're still working on, that you can kind of understand, that you've recently learned, but you haven't totally locked in and it isn't totally unconsciously mastered, that stuff you're probably going to lose. And so if you keep taking breaks, then basically every time you take a break, you're going to lose most of that cutting edge that you were working to master. And then you're going to have to get that back up. So fundamentally speaking, you're not going to lose a lot of your fundamental progress, but it's definitely going to greatly slow down the process of getting better, because let's say that you spend 3 months on and then 1 month off. Well, during that 1 month off, you're probably going to lose most of the progress that you made in the last month of your 3 months. So not only did you not make any progress for a month, but you also lost 1 month's worth of cutting edge progress, because over that last month you were learning things, but they were still in the process of being consolidated within your mind. And so they kind of fell away when you stopped providing the constant exposure to the language. Now, if you're still doing your Anki reps, which you say that you are, I think that that's going to greatly reduce the amount of damage that taking breaks does. Because not only is Anki still a form of exposure to the language, but it's a very optimized form, right? So if you're doing your reps every day, then you're at least going to continue to remember all of the words which you learned in Anki. And if you lean on Anki pretty heavily for learning vocabulary, that means that your vocabulary isn't going to be lost. And especially if you have audio cards where you have whole sentence audio in your cards and things like that, then I would say that you're probably going to lose pretty little in your break periods. You'll still lose some, and it will take a while to get the gears kicking again when you start going more hardcore on the immersion. But I would say that, yeah, if you're still doing the SRS, then you're not truly stopping. And I've noticed, and also yoga I know has noticed, that when there's a big difference between doing a little bit in the language and doing nothing. When you do nothing, it truly just shrivels up in your mind very quickly. But if you do even a little, sometimes that can be enough for your brain to maintain the whole system, right? And what I mean by this is that, for example, yoga, he spent a couple years going really hardcore in Japanese, right? And he got to a really high level where he could comfortably read novels and talk about politics and do whatever. And then he switched to spending very little time in Japanese, and the only thing that he would do is have a little bit of chit-chat with Japanese and his wife here and there, and when they talk, they don't even speak full Japanese. They speak this weird mix of Japanese and English, and they don't really use big, complicated vocabulary or whatever. And that was pretty much all yoga has done for the past many years. Yet, he can still read relatively comfortably, even though that the words that tend to come up in books, he almost never sees. I think it's because the brain has this concept of Japanese as a system, and if you use any portion of the system, that tells the brain that the system as a whole is still important, and so the whole of it gets maintained. So if you know rare literary words in Japanese, even if you don't review those words in particular, if you do anything in Japanese, then you might still go on to remember those literary words. But this only applies to the aspect of the language that you fully acquired and have locked in. Again, anything that's on that level where you're still in the process of learning it, that's probably going to be lost. So anyway, yeah, I would also say if you have the mindset of, oh, I can't go very hardcore right now, so I'm just going to do nothing because I'm going to be able to go hardcore later. I would say that's a little bit of a toxic mindset because the mind is always looking for excuses to try to get out of doing hard work. And I think that ultimately that's what that excuse is, right? Ideally, even if you were busy, you would still do your best to get any immersion that you could. And that way, you'll still be making, perhaps you'll even make progress instead of lose some progress. And when you do have the opportunity to do more daily immersion, you're going to be able to take better advantage of that because you're not going to have to regain lost ground. And so I would say instead of having this on-off mindset, try to move closer to having an always-on mindset, even if there's periods where you can't do very much. Because, again, a little bit is a lot more than none. And this is such a long-term process that you really want to try to be getting as much traction as you can if you really want to be making strides towards fluency. So, yeah, I don't know how clear of an answer that was, but it's because I think it depends on a lot of things. It's probably going to be different depending on your level. Obviously, the better you get, then the less you're going to lose by taking breaks, but also the harder it is inherently to get better. And so I feel like with my Japanese, I do have this kind of on-off thing because maybe for a period I'm really just focused on MIA or meditation or Chinese. I do almost no Japanese. And then I'll spend some more time. I'll have a go through a phase where I spend a lot of time in Japanese. And I feel like I don't lose very much progress, but I definitely don't make progress. And I feel like in order to make progress in Japanese, I would have to do all Japanese all the time for a period of months to start making serious progress. And that's because of the just diminishing returns that you experience when you reach a high level. So that's another thing to take into account. And so, yeah, the better you are, the less you're going to lose, the harder it is to improve, though. And so, yeah, those are kind of the factors. But, yeah, I think I answered your question. Just sometimes I have this experience when I answer the question where I say all my thoughts, but I feel like they weren't organized enough. So I'm like, did I sufficiently answer the question? And I want to re-summarize everything I said, but then I feel like I'm being redundant because I'm just repeating myself. So, yeah, well, if I ever don't answer your question enough, you can post something in the comments and ask me to reiterate something or whatever. I'll just try to be more organized in my thoughts. So Simone asks, "Hi Matt, we all know that MIA is mainly used to learn foreign languages, but what if someone wants to improve his native language? Do you think the approach should be similar? If you had to start this kind of activity, what would you do? Since pronunciation, listening, and writing skills, in terms of grammar and fluency, are at the highest level, what can we do to further improve?" I don't know what you mean by the highest level. That's kind of contradictory to what you're saying and reality, but I would really love to hear your take on this topic. Can you please be more specific on what can be done in each field? So, yeah, you say, since pronunciation, listening, and writing skills in terms of grammar and fluency are at the highest level. So maybe pronunciation, depending on how you define it, is at the highest level, and listening, depending on how you define it. But writing skills, definitely, writing skills and in terms of grammar and fluency, definitely are not going to be at the highest level. There's no highest level for your writing ability. Well, I guess if you're talking about grammar, I guess, yeah, you can master grammar, but I would say even most native speakers probably haven't fully mastered the grammar when it comes to writing, because there's a lot of specific and arbitrary writing conventions that exist. And fluency, I don't know what you mean by fluency. But anyway, so the way that we have laid out MIA is in terms of stages, right? There's 5 stages, and you can go to stage 0 on the MIA website and see the overview for what these 5 stages broadly consist of. And so the first 4 stages mainly have to do with just going from 0 to having a basic ability to function in the language. And then stage 5 is closing the gap between you and a native speaker and going beyond. So most of the things that are in stage 5, you could apply to your native language. And yeah, in that sense, it would be a similar process. But basically what I would say is, if you want to get better at writing, then read a lot and write a lot and get your writing corrected by someone who's good at writing. It's a pretty straightforward process. It's been documented by many authors and writers. It's relatively simple, right? Read a lot. That's probably the most important component, because you have to input into your brain what good writing is, and then you have to actually practice executing it. And getting feedback is an important component of that. So that's how you get better at writing. It's pretty simple and straightforward. In terms of speaking, I think basically just speak a lot. And I've talked about this in videos in the past, but I think the best way to get better at speaking is just to record videos of yourself speaking and then to watch them back and see what you don't like and what you want to improve. And I know that for myself, the process of filming YouTube videos, filming the Q&As, and then watching them back has made me better at speaking, because it's allowed me to become conscious of the aspects of my speech that I didn't like and that I still don't like. And that way, the next time I have an opportunity to speak, I'm more conscious of those aspects that I don't like, and I can try to correct them or fix them. And for me, a lot of this was just using like too much, using too much. And I still do that a lot, and I'm still trying to get better at that. And also just stopping sentences halfway through and then restarting them in a different way. That's something that I used to do a lot more than I do now. I still do it a lot, and I'm trying to improve at it. But I think that makes a big difference in how fluid and just pleasant you sound when you're speaking a language, because it makes your thoughts sound more organized, and it's just easier to follow along with. And the other thing is also input. Right? You have to listen to people who you consider to be good at speaking and kind of take mental notes on what it is about their speech that makes them good at speaking. And I know that for me, just the process of actually filming videos of myself speaking and watching them back made me more conscious of other people's speech, because it made me curious. Like, I noticed, wow, I kind of suck at speaking. I have all these verbal flaws that I hate. What about everyone else? And so I started to pay more attention whenever I watched a YouTube video, or even just when I listened to someone in my life talk. And I'll pay attention to those things, like how fluid are they? Can they speak in continuous sentences without having to start over or use fillers or anything like that? And just how well formed are their sentences, and how eloquent are they? And I think through paying more attention to those type of things while listening to other people speak, it's allowed me to basically raise the quality of my input and absorb some of those things. So fundamentally, it's the same thing with writing. You just have to practice speaking, and then in the case of speaking, instead of getting feedback from the outside, I think it's easier to give yourself feedback if you're a native speaker, because you'll have a good grasp of how do I sound? How do I come across when I watch this video, right? And then, of course, input as well. You find some role models and try to mimic them, basically. But in the case of speaking, I would say output is more important than input compared to writing. In writing, I think input is most important and output is important but less. And in the case of speaking, input is important, but output is what's most important. Because I think when it comes to speaking, we already have it inside of us. It's just a matter of, can we pull that out and execute when we need to. So there's that. And then if you wanted to get better at reading, obviously just read a lot. I don't really think you need to use the SRS in your native language. If you just start reading a lot and you read a large variety of different type of things, then your vocabulary will naturally grow. I think it's pretty clear that the people with the largest vocabularies are the people who read the most. And if you do want to improve your grammar or whatever, because you never learned the official writing conventions or things like that, then just buy a book on English grammar and just gain more meta knowledge, and that will help you become more aware of how English tends to be used. And then when you go back to your input, you'll absorb more of it. So really, it's a really simple idea, basically. You just think about what you want to improve and practice improving that through a combination of input and output. So I think I answered your question. If there's any other aspect that you're concerned with, you can ask that. But I will say, I think that most native speakers are nowhere near close to the limit of ability in their native language. I think that people have a lot of room to grow their both reading comprehension ability and writing ability and speaking ability. Most people don't actively practice these things, and so yeah, they're not that good. But yeah. So Friendly Samoed asks, "Hey Matt, I visited your second channel, Gaijin Dakedo Nanika, and watched the Love and Pop pitch accent video. After that, I downloaded the movie and enjoyed it very much. Can you share more movies that you enjoy, or just show what the process is like when you look for Japanese-related immersion content? Specifically, how do you look for good Japanese movies, anime, dramas, and etc.? Is it a methodical system, or do you just find things to watch/read/listen based on the spur of the moment? If so, can you also share some resources of where to find more interesting immersion content? For example, for anime, I use myanimelist.com as a guide to find what to watch. I think this question might also help beginners who are just starting out in MIA as well." So I'll put a link to my second channel called Gaijin Dakedo Nanika and the Love and Pop video that's being referred to, the pitch accent video. So, I can tell you movies that I happen to like. Again, I can't guarantee that you'll like them because everyone has different taste. But let's see. Japanese movies that I like. Let me open up my Japanese movie folder on my computer. We have, let's see. Bakuman from 2015, the live action one. I like that. Boys on the Run. I thought that was a good movie. Initiation Love. Kirishima Bukatsu Yameruteo. Linda Linda Linda. Moteki. Nanimono, Pale Moon, or Kaminotsuki. Let's see. The Love Vortex, which I think is called Koi no Uzu in Japanese. I'm just reading off the names of the files. Sayonara Kabukicho, Jose to Tora to Sakana Tachi. Jose to Tora to Sakana Tachi. Let's see. Tampopo. Hana to Arisu, Kimi no Suizo Tabetai, kind of corny, but I still liked it. And yeah, those are my biggest recommendations, I would say. Also, just last night I watched this movie called Taiyo no Uta, and actually it was really good. But it was really slow, and the events in the movie played out very, very slowly. And I was actually reflecting on the fact that if I watched this movie a year or two ago, I think I would have been bored to death because of how slow it was. But now, because I kind of have a meditative ability and I'm able to just be present and just absorb whatever is happening on the screen, even if the events are playing out slowly, I was able to really enjoy it, and I thought it was really good. But this is when I'm especially skeptical whether other people would like it or not, because I know a lot of people have short attention spans and they like a lot of fast, stimulating stuff. But in terms of how to find immersion content, so let's see, I wrote some notes of a list of different things. So I think the biggest one is just hearsay from other immersion content. So a lot of times you'll be watching a Japanese YouTube video or drama or radio show or anything else, and you'll hear another piece of content be referred to, right? Like a lot of time in Japanese society, there's some dramas that are really famous. Like for example, Nigeru wa Hajida ga yaku ni tatsu was a huge kind of societal phenomenon when that drama was coming out in 2016, and you heard it referred to everywhere, and you heard it referenced within other media, right? They'd make kind of jokes referring to it. And so if you were paying any attention to what was happening in Japan, it was inevitable that you were going to come across this drama. And so I watched it, and I really liked it. And even today, you see it referred to every once in a while in new media that's coming out. And so that's one way, right? If you're immersing a lot, you're going to hear about other Japanese content, and there's probably going to be some stuff you're interested in. This is what took me through most of my AJAT journey, because especially anime, which is what I used as my main immersion content for most of my experience learning Japanese, anime is very self-referential. And so you'll see a lot of anime referenced inside of other anime. And so just watching anime, I would end up with a list of other anime that I wanted to watch. And so this is one. If you actually are fully immersing yourself in Japanese, it's almost inevitable that you're going to come across lots of other pieces of Japanese media that you're interested in. But other more actionable like tactics you can use is if there's a piece of work, I'm thinking of like sakuhin. What's a good word for sakuhin in English? If there's a piece of media that you really like in Japanese, then look up who the director was or who the author was, and try consuming some other works by the same creators, right? Or even with anime, if there's an anime studio that you really like, you can try watching other anime that was created by the same studio. Like for a while, this was when I was a hardcore otaku when I was learning Japanese. I would try to watch everything by Kyoto Animation and everything by Studio Shaft and a few other studios that had kind of a unique style and I would really like. And so I would end up watching really boring shows just because they were animated by Studio Shaft and had really cool looking art. And so there's that. And then also you can watch things by the same actor, right? If you have an actor or actress that you really like, or even voice actor that you like, you can look up everything that they've been in and just watch all of that. I did a little bit of that with some voice actors that I liked back in the day. And don't ask me what voice actors I liked. I'm not going to tell you. And another thing you can do is just Google like best sports anime or just best Japanese movie. And then there'll be tons of online articles just going over all the most popular anime or just works in a certain genre, right? You can Google best Japanese dramas. And I have done that many times. And I've done that to find a lot of good Japanese movies and things like that. So that's an easy one. And another thing that I tend to do when I want to watch a Japanese movie is I'll just go to a Vistos, which is a torrent site, and I'll just I'll put the language to Japanese and limit the search to movies, and I'll just look at what movies have recently been uploaded. Because I like to watch recent movies, even if they're super corny. I actually like watching really corny movies in Japanese. So a lot of times I'll just watch whatever movie happened to come out that looks like it might be interesting. And I'll watch it without watching the trailer, because in reality, any trailer is spoilers, and it's telling you a lot about the movie. So I like to watch a movie without really knowing anything about it, so I can have a truly, I don't know what you'd call it, a interesting experience where you have no idea what's actually going to happen next. And so a lot of times I'll do that, but I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend that, because most of the time, if you just download a recent movie that came out, it's going to suck and be an awful movie. I actually enjoy that, so I think it's fine. And also, if you go to the MIA Japanese Quick Start Guide, at the end of the immersion section, there's a whole, mini section on exactly how to find immersion content. So if you want more advice, you can go look there. So Robin Coaster asks, "Hey Matt, been a while since I last asked something. I have 2 questions for you. 1, why does my English output sucks so much, and is there a way to fix it, even though my focus is on Japanese now? I would consider myself as fluent in English. For many years now, I can engage in almost any topic and understand 98 to 100% every time, but my output is just wrong. I'm mostly talking about grammar, what's bothering me. It seems like for many, many years now, my brain is locked in this everyone can understand me, no need to improve kind of state. And the thing is also that I can't correct myself. I don't see the mistakes. I can only feel that something is wrong. So I can't even imagine how it must be like for a native speaker to read my English. Is there some way to fix my English output? Forgot that I said that I have 2 questions. I will save the other for another time, and I can't go back and edit that out for some reason. Weird. Patreon should let you edit stuff, so it's weird that it didn't let you. But so I think this comes down to the fact that even if you get a lot of immersion, if you're not paying any attention to the nuances of the language, then your immersion can be very low quality, right? If you're not paying any attention to exactly how native speakers use language, then there's a good chance that your brain's not going to pick that up because it doesn't need to. When I was doing Japanese, I always paid very close attention to what form are words being conjugated to, what particles are being used. And it wasn't a conscious thing. It wasn't like I was trying to consciously deduce principles or anything. I would just pay attention and say, this word, ga, this word, yatteru, or whatever. And because of that, I think I picked up almost everything that I need. And also, I just had this desire to get good at the language. And ultimately, I think that this is the key thing. I think that when you immerse with the desire to be able to imitate what you are hearing, your unconscious mind automatically acquires way more because it actually has a reason to, right? Conscious intentions have a very strong influence over your unconscious mind, and ultimately acquisition is unconscious. So if you're immersing in content and your conscious or subconscious intention is, as long as I can understand it, that's fine. I don't care if my output is wanky because they'll still be able to understand me. Then with that, guided under that intention, your unconscious mind isn't going to go through all the work to try to break down exactly how native speech is used so that it can replicate it, right? But if you have the subconscious intention, I want to sound exactly like a Japanese person, or I want to sound exactly like an American person, so I need to pick everything up, then that is going to fuel your unconscious mind to look at more patterns. So it doesn't surprise me that people like yourself who never really cared that much about the quality of their output went on to have kind of some wanky output. Now, I'll say also, your output isn't that bad. There's been a lot of people who post questions on these bi-weekly Q&As who have way worse English than you, and I have a lot harder time reading it out loud without totally getting all messed up. So yours really isn't that bad, I would say. But if you wanted to go back and fix it, the first thing I would say is you need to change the attitude that you approach immersing in English with, right? You have to adopt that mindset of, I want to be able to replicate this as closely as possible, and start just paying more attention to what words are used, how are things conjugated, when is there an S, when is there not an S, when is there not an S. And that's the first thing, because as soon as you change your mindset to, as long as I can understand it is fine, to, I need to pick all of this up and dissect all of this, then your unconscious mind is automatically going to be absorbing way more. So that's the most important thing. And the second thing is, if you have lots of bad habits that you need to fix, that is a difficult issue, and it's possible to overcome, but it's difficult. And this is why I recommend that people wait to output until they've already cultivated an intuition for what's correct and not correct, so they don't have to go through the process of undoing bad habits. But basically, you have to get corrected by a native speaker and find out what you're doing wrong, and then pay attention to how those aspects of language are done correctly by native speakers. So, for example, you wrote, why does my English output sucks so much? But it would be correct to say, why does my English output suck so much? So maybe now that you know that this is a mistake you potentially make, you should go and find out the difference between suck and sucks. I can't articulate it to you because I'm a native speaker and I don't study English grammar, but you should learn the principle and then try to pay attention to that in native speech and notice, oh yeah, there's no S in this situation. Oh yeah, there is an S in this situation. And once you pay attention to that a couple times, you probably will start to get an intuition for it, and then you'll be able to do it correctly yourself after you do it more consciously a couple times. So yeah, I think it's mainly just a matter of changing your mindset that you approach English with and increasing your attention to detail, and then getting corrected and paying attention to the mistakes that you get corrected in native speech. A lot of times, if you just get corrected and just memorize the rule, that's not going to be enough. You have to actually pay attention to it happening in native speech over and over again, and through that you build the intuition, and through the intuition you're able to do it correctly yourself. So that's why I think most people don't have very much success with trying to just get corrected all the time, because if you just get corrected and have the conscious knowledge of how to do it correctly, that's not enough. You have to have the intuition, and that can only come through input. So it's a matter of using the correction to direct your attention to whatever aspect you need to absorb when you're outputting. And that's basically how I got better at pitch accent. So Louis DeBrat asks, are meditation and ambition compatible? And if so, how do you make them work together? A while ago, I got to a point in meditation where I realized that maybe I didn't need to learn Japanese. In fact, maybe I didn't need to improve at anything other than meditation. Since the whole point of meditation was to help me in my language learning, that scared me off and I stopped. However, it's undeniable that meditating helped me in language learning as well as in other areas of life. I want to get back into it, but I feel like a hypocrite meditating while leading a life that goes against any revelations meditation has brought me. Have you ever had a similar experience, and or what are your general thoughts on what I just said? Interesting question. Well, yeah, meditation and ambition are completely compatible, but the thing you have to think about is what is the underlying motivation behind your ambition. For example, when I was learning Japanese, I was doing it mainly because I felt that I was an outcast in my own culture. I felt like I wasn't accepted in my own culture. I felt like I was low. Had a low position within the social hierarchy, and that hurt my ego and made me feel like I wasn't enough. And so I thought that if I learned Japanese and went to Japan, and also convinced myself that the Japanese social hierarchy was more important than the American social hierarchy, then I would be able to get to a point where I felt that I was accepted and validated and enough. And that was my main motivation for learning Japanese. It was about adding on more to myself so that I could feel that I was enough. And even once I became disillusioned with Japan, but still was studying Japanese, my motivations were constantly morphing, but it always had to do with adding something on to my ego, right? It always came from this fundamental, very deep-seated sense of lack, a sense that I wasn't enough as I wasn't complete, and wanting to become more. And so mastering Japanese and having the credential of master of Japanese, better at Japanese than everyone else, that was going to make me more, or make me enough. And that was my main motivation. And so, yeah, if I started doing a lot of meditation at the time and became more aware, I might have realized that what I was doing was completely silly. Because the thing is, at the time, I didn't realize that was what I was doing. It was completely unconscious, this whole mechanism I just described. I wasn't conscious of the fact that, I feel like I am incomplete, but I think that learning Japanese will complete me. If I would have seen that was what was happening, it would have been obviously a stupid, silly idea, and I would have stopped. The only reason it's possible is because it's unconscious. And this is a really powerful insight, that a lot of times it's really easy to see other people engaging in really stupid, silly endeavors, and from your point of view, it's like, how could they be so stupid to think that that's a good idea? But the thing is, they don't think it's a good idea because they don't even know that that's what they're doing. It's unconscious. What unconscious means is that you literally don't know. It's under your radar. You have no idea what's going on. You have a different story that you tell yourself consciously that is completely unrelated to the fundamental reason, and you believe that fake story is the full explanation of what's going on. So, for example, I was telling myself the conscious story, America sucks, Japan's super awesome, Japanese people are so great, I just want to know Japanese so that I can be a part of their amazing culture, and I don't even want to be Japanese. I just want to be able to appreciate their culture and consume this media that I like, and I just love the language because it's beautiful, so I'm learning it just because of that. And I had this whole narrative that was complete bullshit, right? It's not, maybe there was some truth to that, but that wasn't really why I was doing it at all. I was doing it because I felt that I didn't fit into my own culture, and that hurt, and I wanted to feel like I was enough and that I fit in. And so I think that probably to some extent, anyone who is in their late teens or early 20s and decides that they want to dedicate their whole life to mastering a second language, they probably have a little bit of that going on. They probably have a little bit of unconscious delusion, and they're using Japanese as a way to further their egoic agenda, but they're probably not aware of that, because if you were aware of that, then you wouldn't do it because it'd obviously be silly and not, you'd be clear that it wasn't going to get you anywhere. Now, I think that's fine on a certain level. Like for me, that was what I had to do at the time. I was at the level of consciousness and the level of development that I was at. I wasn't ready for any more clarity than that. And so that was what I did. And later on, I realized what was going on, and I realized that I learned a big lesson through learning Japanese. I learned how mastering skills isn't going to make me feel any more complete than buying more physical objects, right? A lot of people in the world, they seek to become more complete, become more by acquiring more physical objects like a bigger house or a bigger car, or maybe even an attractive mate. And from my point of view, even since when I was a child, it was clear that that's obviously not going to lead to happiness, and that getting more physical stuff isn't actually going to be doing anything for me. So I could totally understand why there were really rich, wealthy people who were depressed, because they're the same person, even though they're surrounded by stuff. That stuff isn't part of them. But what I didn't see is that gaining more skills is actually fundamentally the same thing, because I am not my Japanese ability. So just because I can do Japanese, that doesn't mean that I am any more as a person. Just like how having a nice car doesn't make me any more as a person. And that is something that I couldn't see at the time. But fundamentally, the structure was the same. And so this is something I learned through learning Japanese. And this ability, or not this ability, but this insight, this understanding is very valuable. And it's something I think I only could have learned through experience. Now I understand this, and I don't try to seek to add more to myself by acquiring skills or acquiring money or anything, because I see that it doesn't work. I've been to the other end and realized that I feel exactly the same as when I first started. And so basically what I'm saying is, if you were learning Japanese for a bad reason, then it totally makes sense that meditating is going to uproot your motivation, because you're going to become aware of your bad motivation, and then it's not going to work anymore, right? The kind of egoic, unconscious motivation that I was talking about, it only works because it's unconscious. As soon as you become conscious of it, it's obviously stupid, and then you don't do it anymore. And so I think that, there's probably a good possibility that you were learning Japanese for a bad reason, and through meditating, it got close to the point where you almost were going to see your motivation for what it was. It sounds like you didn't fully get there, but you were starting to get there, and as you got close to that, your motivation started to wane a little bit. Now, if you had a truly pure motivation, if you wanted to learn Japanese for Japanese's own sake, or because you had a bigger plan and learning Japanese was part of that plan, then becoming increasingly conscious and aware isn't going to affect your motivation, right? Basically, I think that most people's motivation for most things is very egoic, to just put it bluntly, right? Most people are fundamentally very selfish, and that's just the structure of the mind. It's not a bad thing. People, they can't help it, right? And even I'm still mostly like 100% selfish, because that's just the structure of how your mind works. And until you reach a very high level of development, it's almost impossible to truly care about other people's needs for their own sake, unless it's someone who happens to be very close to you, like a loved one, basically. And so once you reach a really high level of development, you start to care about other people's needs just as much as your own needs. And this isn't to say you don't care about your own needs, right? A lot of people say like, oh, but if you just care about everyone else and you neglect yourself, then blah, blah, blah. No, you still care about yourself. It's not like you think you're not worthy of compassion and self-care. But you get to a point where the highest joy in life is helping other people. And you can find lots of people saying this. And this isn't my baseline level of experience, but I've had peak experiences on meditation and psychedelics where I temporarily reached a level of consciousness where it became very clear that the greatest possible joy in life is helping other people for their own sake, with whether or not you gain anything from that process. And so if you have a kind of pure motivation that's rooted in compassion or just love for other people, I think that meditation is only going to strengthen that. Right? It's not going to harm that. But if you have an egoic motivation where you're just trying to further your own egoic agenda to become more so that you can be better than other people or just strengthen your egoic identity, then yeah, meditation is going to uproot that, because ultimately the ego is illusory. It doesn't exist. It's an illusion. And as you become more conscious, you become more directly aware of the fact that it's an illusion. And so every motivation that's predicated on the belief in that illusion is going to dissolve. And so what I would say is everyone's at a different spot in life. And so meditating and becoming increasingly conscious and transcending the ego is not going to be something that most people do in this life. And that's totally fine. Everyone's just where they're at. Everyone's having whatever experience they're having. And I think in general, as a society, we're moving in the direction of becoming more conscious. But I don't think it's right to say that everyone should drop everything they're doing and meditate so that they can completely transcend their egoic identity or whatever. So you have to look inside and say, what do you think is the best for you? Is it, becoming more aware and conscious to the side and just focusing on kind of going into the world of furthering your own egoic agenda? And of course, I'm making it sound like it's not a very good thing. Or are you ready to try to transcend that and have a motivation that's based in something bigger? And only you can answer that question. But it may be true that if your desire to learn Japanese is based in something kind of shallow and egoic and something ultimately delusional, then yeah, meditation might uproot that. But whether the right answer is to basically not meditate and go into the side of delusion and unconsciousness, or to go to the side of meditation and shed all of that delusion, which is the truly difficult and painful path, that's up to you. And you asked about my own experience. Yeah, I've had lots of times like this. And it took me pretty much, I still go through it, but ever since I made my 2-hour video, that was the first time that I truly became conscious of the fact that my motivation to learn Japanese was completely bullshit. And ever since then, I've been going back and forth between trying to let go of that and become more conscious, and then getting pulled back in by that just due to the gravitational force of the ego and survival. And over time, I've been able to distance myself away from it more and more. And now the possibility of engaging with Japanese from an entirely different motivation has presented itself within the past year to me. And now I can see that I can engage in Japanese simply because it's a way for me to provide value to other people. It's also just a way for me to get money because I need money to live and survive. So that's a big part of it. But I can see that I don't need to have Japanese be a part of my identity in the same way that it was before. It can be just an activity that I engage in for other reasons. And now that I have kind of shifted in that way, the more I meditate, it no longer affects my motivation to learn Japanese or not. My motivation to learn Japanese is not even close to what it used to be, because before I literally used to believe that getting better at Japanese, and again, this was totally unconscious, so that's why it sounds so silly, right? I was totally unaware of it, but I believed on a unconscious level that getting better at Japanese meant bettering myself, literally. Like, it meant that I was going to become more as a person. And so, of course, I had a lot of motivation to get as good at Japanese as possible. Now I see that Japanese is just this tool, and getting better at it can lead to me being able to help other people in different ways and do more useful things, but it's not an end in itself anymore. And so, in that way, I'm not going to be ever as motivated to get that good at it again. And I think that's a good thing, because I wasted a lot of effort trying to become perfect in Japanese just for my own egoic, selfish sake, instead of doing something that might actually help other people, which would not only bring me a greater type of joy, but would just be better for the whole of all of humanity. So that was mostly what I really think. That might sound like crazy woo-woo talk to a lot of people listening to this, but you asked a pretty intense question, so I was just honest with how I feel about that. So, Hammer asks, "Hello, Matt. In your video about the pitch accent of the word soul, you said that currently all pitch accent resources suck. You also said you wanted to create new pitch accent learning materials in order to supplement the flaws found in current materials. Unfortunately, we don't have that now, so recently I've been thinking about purchasing a pitch accent dictionary in order to have access to the rules at the end of the book. Do you think that would be a good investment? If yes, which dictionary do you recommend?" So yeah, if you're serious about pitch accent, the Shinmeikai Accent Dictionary and the NHK Accent Dictionary are by far the best resources that exist. I think that it would be worth buying both. I bought both. And I'm specifically talking about the section at the end of the book where all the pitch accent rules are explained. Having the actual dictionary to be able to look up more up-to-date listings of the pitch accent of individual words is useful as well. But yeah, it's really the rules listed in the back of the book that's most important. But also, I have made PDFs of the back of both of these books, and you can find access to them on the MI resource sheet, which is linked on the MI Discord server. So, I mean, it's piracy, but if you can right now get access to both of them without paying any money. But even if that wasn't possible, I think it would be possible to spend the $100 to get them, because they're by far the best resources in existence right now. Samuel Racky asks, suggestions on how to find non-anime immersion content for a beginner learning Japanese. Never been a big anime fan, so it's been a hindrance to my motivation to have to immerse with it. Open to any recommendations you have too. Well, I would recommend either drama or movies, because as a beginner, content like YouTube videos, podcasts, radio, they're going to be almost completely incomprehensible and not very good to learn from. So I recommend learning something with a narrative component and with a visual component. And if you don't like anime, that leaves you with drama and movies. So you can search best Japanese dramas and find many web pages, many articles that list 10 or 20 Japanese dramas with a synopsis of each one. So I recommend doing that and reading the synopsis of a bunch of dramas and looking for one that's interesting to you. And that is what I would recommend. I don't have any specific recommendations for beginners because I don't really keep track of the difficulty of shows beyond ones that are extremely difficult. And for me, most dramas are easy, and so I don't have a good sense of would this be easy or difficult for a beginner or not. Oops, I just accidentally clicked on Photoshop on my computer, so my computer's like loading it and stuff. So one sec. Okay, I closed it. So SB asks, what does a complete English version of MI look like in your mind? Referring to the last Q&A. So what I'm thinking now is there's going to be two components of it. One is going to be the tools, like the Anki add-ons and stuff, and one is going to be the articles on the website. And I think the way that we're going to try to organize it now is that for each stage, there's going to be a guide. Like I wrote the MI Quick Start Guide, but really that's the stage 1 guide. So there's going to be a guide for every stage 1 through 5, and it's just going to be one web page, one really long web page with a table of contents. And that's going to be the bulk of MIA. But it's going to be non-language specific. So any language specific material like pitch accent or kanji is going to be on a separate page just for that language. So for example, with Japanese, there's going to be the stage 1 guide, and then there's going to be the Japanese resource page. And on the Japanese resource page, it's going to have all the parts of the main stages that are specific to Japanese, along with other resources. So basically, when you click on the stage 1 guide, which is for every language, there's going to be sections where it says, if you're learning Japanese or Chinese, then learn the characters. Find out how to do that here for Japanese or here for Chinese. And there'll be a link to the section of the language specific page that has that section. And so, yeah, there's going to be the 5 main just guides that have all the actual information you need to execute. And then there's going to be the 1 page for each language that has all the information unique to that language. And then each of these pages will be linked in the appropriate sections of the main guide. And then there's going to be another section just for theory and motivation that applies really to any stage. And that's just going to have its own section. And the reason why it's going to be separate is because you can read the stage 1 guide and then you have everything you need to actually get started. And so you can read the other motivation and theory sections as you go, but you don't need them to get started. So now it's clear, what do you need to read to get started? You can just read the bare minimum. And then once you get going, you can go back and fill yourself in on the extra information, like the in-depth theory and motivation related stuff and stuff like that. So yeah, the English version of MI is going to be complete when we have each stage guide 1 through 5, and then the language guide through all the main languages that we're going to do. And we haven't decided on that totally yet. Obviously, the first ones we're going to do are Japanese and Chinese probably, but we'll add a lot more. And then with all the main theory and motivation articles, and then all the MIA add-ons that we want to make. And we have a long list of add-ons we want to make, but like I mentioned in a previous Q&A, I don't want to talk about that because I talked about in a Q&A exactly why I'm not going to talk about our plans regarding the add-ons we're going to make. So you can check that out. I'll put a link in the description to that. So Haytor asks, how should I choose between an audio sentence versus a sentence card when mining? So I guess you mean an audio sentence versus a text sentence. An audio sentence card versus a text sentence card. Assuming I have full sentence audio, which type is the most beneficial for which goals? So I specifically answer this question in the MI Japanese Quick Start Guide. If you go to the sentence card section, there's a header called text-based versus audio-based sentence cards. So I'll put a link to that in the description. That literally answers your question completely. So let's see. Normal Wario asks, what are your thoughts on the distinction that some language learners make between extensive and intensive reading? Extensive reading is reading a lot of easy material, say 95% or more comprehension, relatively quickly. Intensive reading is reading difficult material relatively slowly and carefully. Do you think one is more effective overall at improving comprehension? Do you think they are more effective at improving different skills or more effective at different points in the acquisition process? Do you think it's a useful distinction to make in the first place? So I think it's useful to make distinctions between different types of reading, but I wouldn't use this strict distinction between extensive reading and intensive reading because, yeah, extensive reading is reading where you pretty much already understand everything and generally you don't use a dictionary at all. And then intensive reading is where you understand very little, or at least not close to full comprehension, and you're basically looking up every single word, trying to understand it 100%, and so you might spend a whole hour on one paragraph. That's normally how I hear these two referred to, and I don't think that either of these are really that useful. I think that it's mainly useful to read things that are between, I think if you can, reading things that are 90% comprehensible are best, but I also recommend looking things up in the dictionary occasionally, not all the time, but I think looking things up. So basically, I think the best way to read is a kind of hybrid between these two, where, yeah, you have a high comprehension, you're still looking things up, and I have a video on how often you should look things up. So you're not looking up everything, but you are looking up occasionally, and that's going to speed things along versus never looking things up, like a lot of the extensive reading camp people talk about. And so if I had to choose one, extensive reading is obviously way more effective than intensive reading, because if you're taking that intensive reading approach where you're looking up literally everything, trying to understand everything, even though your comprehension starts off so low, that's obviously super inefficient, because you can only truly understand things that are either I+0 or I+1 to you. And so spending a lot of time to try to somehow gain an understanding of an I+2, 3, or 4 sentence is just a bad, inefficient use of time. And even if you end up being able to kind of understand it intellectually, that's not really going to help you because it's way above your level. You're not going to be able to acquire anything from that. So really, I think that you should, language acquisition happens from consuming I+1 input. And so, yeah, you should be trying to understand things and looking things up. But if after looking it up, you still can't understand it, you should quickly drop it and move on. Because if it was I+1, you would have understood it almost immediately after spending just a few moments with it. And so this idea of trying to just really focus in on one paragraph or whatever until you can almost understand it fully, I think that's a really bad use of time. I never do that. I never do that studying Chinese. And so, yeah, I guess I would say that I think the best way to read is extensive reading with occasional dictionary lookup. Now, at the beginning, you're not going to be able to find any meaningful material that you understand 95%, and so instead, I recommend just watching with subs. So, for example, in Chinese right now, there's no meaningful reading material that I could understand above 90% of. Now, I could go to Link and read some dumbed-down story meant for people learning Chinese, but I have no interest in doing that. That sounds awful. And so instead, I'm just watching Chinese dramas that I actually am interested in with Chinese subs. And yeah, I don't understand that much, but I just watch the subs as the show goes on, and I slowly pick up more and more. And when there is a truly I+1 sentence, I get it, because that's what it means to be I+1, is the second you see it, your brain just learned something because it was really ripe to learn whatever it was that that sentence taught you. And so what I would recommend is watch with subs for a while and don't worry about your comprehension, and continue to learn words through Anki and Immerse. And once you get to the point where you can find reading material that it's at least 80% comprehensible, then maybe start reading actual books. But don't try to go for 100% comprehension. Just try to get the main gist. Like the first time I read a novel in Japanese, I probably had like 60 or 70% comprehension, but it was great. I learned a ton reading that book, even though I understood so little. And so it wasn't extensive reading because I wasn't understanding 95%. It wasn't intensive reading either because I wasn't looking up every single thing. I was just skipping tons of stuff and only looking up the stuff that seemed to be the most important and the most valuable. And through that, I learned a lot. And by the time I got to my third book, I was actually understanding between 90 and 95%. So that's what I would recommend doing. So I guess, yeah, it's useful to think critically about how are you approaching reading, but the wholesale distinction between extensive and intensive, I don't think either of those are the answer. I think it's more, and generally, yeah, extensive with some dictionary lookups until you get there, then you're basically really not doing either one in any way. So Thomas Donovan asks, roughly how many words would you say you currently know in Japanese? No idea, but I would guess somewhere around 30,000 probably. JP Ladd asks, for my base Japanese voice, speaking without a filter, I want to come across as either a seductive, suave playboy or a gruff, masculine badass. Could you point me in the right direction to gather immersion media for those? I don't know what the two respective voices sound like in natural Japanese. Do you think it's possible to target those elements in my Japanese learning? So the way that MIA works is that first you work on understanding and then you work on speaking. So if you are not at the point where you can understand Japanese, then you shouldn't really be worrying about how you're going to speak Japanese, because you have to be able to understand before you can speak anyway. So I would recommend just finding whatever content helps you get better at speaking. And then when you choose a parent, which comes in stage 3, I think, then you can find someone whose speech you want to replicate, and you can make sure that that person speaks the way that you want to speak. But the whole idea is, by the time you get to stage 3 and you're starting to really hone in on the way that you want to eventually speak Japanese, you already know enough Japanese where you can choose your own parent, because you can actually listen to different speech styles and know what they sound like. And so you can actually find someone that you personally resonate with and go, oh yeah, this is what I want to sound like. So I don't recommend immersing from your parent from the beginning, because that's too limited and you have to be able to understand everyone anyway. So yeah, just focus on understanding and get to the point where you can actually pick the person out yourself. Because honestly, you don't really want to just sound like someone who I picked out for you and just blindly trust me, right? Really, you want to pick out someone who you resonate with, because this vague idea of I want to sound like a suave playboy, right? That's an ideal that you're taking from English or some other languages, right? You don't really understand the meta of Japanese. And so you don't really know whether that's how you want to speak in Japanese or not, right? You have to already know Japanese before you can decide how you want to come across in Japanese. Because it could be that the playboy archetype in your native language is something that you resonate with, but in Japanese, it comes across completely different, and you realize that that's not what you resonate with. You resonate with something else. And so, yeah, I'm not just going to pick someone out for you because your Japanese sensibilities that don't exist yet, right? So you can't just import and translate your sensibilities from a different language. That's not how it works. They're not compatible. They don't translate. So you have to actually develop Japanese sensibilities, and then you can choose who you want on your own, who you want to sound like or whatever. So last question, Jeffrey Downing asks, what have you enjoyed the most about learning Chinese so far? Do you have any plans to learn another language after you get fluent? So I think the thing that I've enjoyed the most so far is just learning firsthand the way that kanji were meant to be used and the way that kanji like basically the language that kanji were developed for, and realizing how fucked up Japanese is as a language and how just messy it is, really, if I was going to put a single word on it. And yeah, Chinese is just so elegant in the way that it's like the minimum information principle is applied so often. They say so little when you're really just breaking down the content of what they say to express an idea. They say so little compared to Japanese or English. And just the sound system and the way that the characters are implemented into the language, it's so simple and internally consistent. And I think that is so elegant. And just the process of learning how to comprehend meaning through this system is in itself very intrinsically pleasing. And I really have been enjoying that. And do I have any plans to learn another language after I get fluent? Nope, definitely not. I'm pretty certain that I'm never going to learn another language after this. I'm going to reach a near native level in Japanese and Chinese, and I'm obviously at a native level of English. And then I'm just going to spend the rest of my life focusing on polishing these 3 languages, getting better and better in all 3, and focusing on what am I actually doing in these languages to have a positive impact on the world. And I really don't want to spend any more time sucking at languages. It just, in a way, feels inherently unproductive. It's fun. I'm enjoying the process of learning Chinese, but I'm going back to being a baby instead of functioning as an adult, And it feels like I don't want to spend my whole life being a baby, essentially, and just learning how to speak all these languages without actually doing anything in them, right? I want to spend the rest of my life using languages that I can already speak to positively influence the world. And in a way, I already think it's silly to learn 3 languages. I think that I ended up doing this because right now my career is teaching people languages, and I kind of think it's important for me to be engaging in the process of learning a language, because otherwise I'll feel like I'm speaking out of my ass because it's been too long since I learned Japanese. But really, it feels like learning one language and then spending your life constantly reaching higher levels of mastery in your native language and that language, and using those languages to do something cool would be a better path, because learning a language to a high level takes so long and it takes so much energy. And now that I'm going through with Chinese, I realize that it's very hard to justify in most circumstances doing it multiple times. So yeah, that's all for this week. Thanks for supporting, and leave your questions again, like I said at the beginning, and I'll see you guys next time.